What if everything you thought was love was actually just familiar pain wearing love's face? What if the reason you keep attracting people who underestimate you, dismiss you, or walk all over you isn't because you're broken, it isn't because you're weak. And it absolutely is not because you deserve it, but because somewhere a long time ago, someone who was supposed to protect you taught your nervous system that this is what love looks like? What if your tolerance for disrespect isn't a personality flaw, it's a survival skill that outlived its purpose? Here's what I know from years of research, from thousands of stories, from sitting with the most courageously vulnerable people I've ever met. Trauma doesn't just hurt you, it trains you. It trains you to make yourself smaller. It trains you to over-explain your pain to people who caused it. It trains you to stay in rooms where your dignity is constantly negotiated. But here's the truth that will change everything if you let it. What was learned can be unlearned. The wiring is not permanent. The story is not finished. And you sitting right where you are, carrying everything you've carried, you are not too far gone. Stay with me. Because what comes next might be the most important conversation you've ever had with yourself. What if the most dangerous thing trauma ever did to you wasn't the wound itself, but the way it quietly, systematically, without your permission, rewired what you believe you deserve? I want to sit with that question for a moment, because I think most of us, when we talk about trauma, we talk about the event. We talk about what happened. We talk about the person who hurt us, the situation that broke us, the moment everything changed. And that conversation matters. That conversation is sacred. But there is another conversation, a harder one, a quieter one, that we are not having nearly enough. And it is this: what did surviving that experience teach you to accept? Because here is what the data shows, and here is what the stories confirm over and over and over again. Trauma is not just an experience you have. Trauma becomes a lens through which you see yourself. It becomes a measuring stick for what is normal. It becomes, without you ever consciously choosing it, the architecture of your relationships. I want to talk about a woman, I'll call her Dr. Waterling, because her story holds something universal, something so many of us recognize, even if we've never spoken it out loud. Dr. Waterling was, by every external measure, extraordinary. She had built a career through sheer intellectual brilliance and relentless hard work. She had letters after her name. She had presentations at international conferences. She had colleagues who admired her and students who were transformed by her. And she came to me not in a research capacity, but in the deeply human capacity that sometimes dissolves every professional boundary. And she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "I am the most competent person in every room I walk into professionally. And somehow I still end up in relationships where I am treated like I am nothing. And the worst part, I don't leave. I explain, I try harder, I make myself smaller, I convince myself that maybe they're right." Now I want you to stop and feel the weight of that. A woman of extraordinary capability, of documented excellence, of genuine brilliance, sitting across from disrespect and not just tolerating it, defending it, internalizing it, believing it might actually be the truth about her. That is not a character flaw. That is trauma doing exactly what trauma does. Waterling grew up in a home where love was conditional and performance dependent, where affection was withdrawn without warning, where she learned, not through a single lesson, but through thousands of small accumulated moments, that her value was something she had to constantly reprove, that she had to earn her place, that disagreement was dangerous, that needing things made her a burden, that the safest way to exist in relationship was to make herself as undemanding, as accommodating, as easy as possible. Her nervous system didn't learn this because she was weak. Her nervous system learned this because she was a child in a situation where this adaptation literally kept her emotionally safe. And the human nervous system, my God, it is remarkable. It will do whatever it takes to survive. It will compress your needs, silence your voice, override your instincts, numb your pain, all in service of keeping you connected to the people you depend on for survival. The problem is the nervous system doesn't file a report when the danger has passed. It doesn't send a notification that says childhood is over, new operating system available, please update. It just keeps running the old program because the old program kept you alive, and survival is the most powerful teacher there is. So Dr. Waterling walked into her adult life with a doctorate in her field and a nervous system that was still 6 years old, still in that house, still learning that her comfort matters less than someone else's mood. Still learning that speaking up risks losing everything. Still learning that love and pain are so deeply intertwined that one without the other doesn't quite feel real. And I want to pause here because this is the part that breaks my heart and fills me with something fierce at the same time. Because she knew something was wrong. She wasn't unaware. She had read the book, she had the vocabulary, she could explain attachment theory with extraordinary clarity, but knowing is not the same as unlearning. And this is where we get so confused about healing. We think that if we understand our trauma, we have healed from it. We think insight equals transformation, but insight is just the beginning. Insight is you standing at the door of a room that has held you captive and finally being able to see the door. Unlearning is walking through it. And walking through it is terrifying because on the other side of that door is not automatically safety. On the other side of that door is unfamiliarity. And unfamiliarity to a traumatized nervous system registers as danger. Dr. Waterling told me something in one of our later conversations that stopped me completely. She said, when I finally met someone who was consistently kind, no volatility, no agenda, no punishment for needing things, I didn't feel relieved. I felt suspicious. I kept waiting for the real version of them to show up. I kept thinking, this can't be right. This feels too easy. Love isn't supposed to feel this easy. And there it is. There is the deepest, most insidious work of trauma. It doesn't just teach you to accept disrespect. It teaches you to distrust the absence of it. When chaos has been your emotional home for long enough, calm doesn't feel like safety. Calm feels like the quiet before something breaks. When criticism has been the primary language spoken in your closest relationships, someone who speaks to you with consistent gentleness doesn't feel like love. It feels like they must not really know you yet, because the part of you that was trained in that early environment is absolutely convinced that if they knew the real you, the messy, imperfect, needy, complicated real you, they would leave, or they would change, or they would finally show you who they actually are. This is why intellectual understanding is not enough. This is why we can know in the most articulate and well-researched terms exactly why we do what we do and still do it. Because the knowing lives in our prefrontal cortex, and the wound lives in our body and our nervous system, in the part of us that is primal and ancient and not at all interested in our very sophisticated analysis of our own behavior. How do we actually unlearn something that is woven into the fabric of how we experience safety and connection and love? Dr. Waterling and I talked about this at length, not as researcher and subject, but as two human beings trying to understand something true. And what she described, and what the research consistently points toward, is not a single moment of breakthrough. It is not a realization that fixes everything. It is something much slower and much braver than that. It is the practice of noticing the impulse to shrink and choosing just barely, just enough to take up a little more space. It is the practice of sitting with the discomfort of someone else's disappointment without immediately dismantling yourself to make it stop. It is learning to distinguish between a nervous system alarm that says this is genuinely unsafe, and a nervous system alarm that says this is unfamiliar and unfamiliarity feels like danger but isn't. It is at its core learning to reparent yourself. And I use that word with full awareness of how loaded it is. Reparenting doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It doesn't mean forgiving people who haven't earned it or minimizing what was done to you. Reparenting means becoming for yourself, by yourself, with whatever support you can gather around you, the thing you needed and didn't get. It means telling yourself when you want to apologize for having needs, your needs are not too much. It means staying in conversations that feel uncomfortable instead of immediately smoothing everything over. It means practicing in the smallest possible moments the belief that your dignity is not negotiable. Dr. Waterling told me about a specific moment, and she gave me permission to share this because she said she wanted it to land somewhere useful, where she was in a meeting and a colleague interrupted her again for what she said was probably the 100th time. And her old response was ready and waiting, smile, redirect, find a way to make the interruption less awkward for everyone, continue with less certainty, take up less space. And she said she felt that impulse rise in her body like a familiar wave. And then she did something different. She stopped. She looked at her colleague. And she said, with the quietest possible firmness, I wasn't finished. 3 words, I wasn't finished. And she said her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. She said she felt the flush of shame that comes when you've been trained to believe that asserting yourself is aggression, that taking up space is selfishness, that asking to be heard is asking too much. But she held it, and her colleague stopped, and she finished her thought, and the world did not end, and she did not lose the relationship. And nothing terrible happened. And she said to me, it sounds so small. It was so small, but it was the biggest thing I had done in years. Because here's what she was actually practicing in that moment. Not assertiveness as a professional skill, not communication as a technique, but something far more fundamental. She was practicing the radical, terrifying, life-altering belief that she was worth finishing, that her thought deserved to be completed, that her voice had a right to exist in that room. She was practicing worthiness, and worthiness is the heartbeat of everything. Here is what I know to be true. You cannot shame yourself into worthiness. You cannot logic yourself into it. You cannot read enough books or attend enough workshops or understand your trauma with sufficient precision and arrive at worthiness through intellectual effort alone. Worthiness is practiced, it is chosen, over and over and over again in the smallest possible moments, in the moments when every old training says be smaller and something new and brave in you says not today. And I want to speak directly to the person who has spent years being told, explicitly or implicitly, through actions or through silence, that their needs are inconvenient and their feelings are too much and their presence requires constant justification. I want to speak to the person who has become so expert at reading other people's moods that they have almost entirely lost track of their own. I want to speak to the person who mistakes drama for passion and peace for indifference and kindness for weakness. You were not born believing you deserved less. You were taught that. And what was taught can be untaught, not easily, not quickly, not without grief, because there is profound grief in recognizing how much you gave to people in situations that were not worthy of it. But it can be done. The nervous system is not fixed. The story is not finished. The wound is not your identity. Dr. Waterling, the last time I spoke with her, said something that I have carried with me since. She said, I used to think healing meant going back to who I was before the damage. But I'm starting to understand that the person I was before the damage was also shaped by earlier damage. There is no before, there is only forward. There is only this, practicing every single day who I want to become. That is it. That is the whole thing. There is no destination called healed, where you arrive and all the old patterns are permanently gone and you never again feel the pull of the familiar wound. There is only the practice. There is only the daily, imperfect, astonishing courage of choosing differently one small moment at a time. Trauma trained you. It trained you with extraordinary efficiency in service of your survival, with the best intentions your nervous system had available. But you are not just a survival story. You are a living story. And living stories get to be rewritten, not by erasing what came before, but by adding what comes next. What comes next is yours. What comes next is the chapter where you decide, not once, but every single morning, that your dignity is not a reward for good behavior. Your peace is not a luxury you have to earn. Your voice is not a privilege extended to you by people who could just as easily take it away. These are not gifts that other people give you. These are truths about who you already are. And the work, the beautiful, gut-wrenching, life-changing work, is learning to live like you believe it. What if the most profound act of courage you will ever commit is not climbing a mountain or crossing an ocean or standing in front of thousands of people, but sitting quietly with yourself and deciding finally that you are enough, that you have always been enough, that every single thing you accepted that you should not have accepted was never a reflection of your worth, only of your wound. Dr. Waterling taught me something I didn't expect when we began talking. I thought I was studying her. I realize now she was showing me something universal, something that lives in all of us who have ever made peace with pain because peace felt too risky to reach for. She showed me that healing is not dramatic. It is not a single moment of breakthrough. It is the accumulation of tiny, terrifying choices to speak, to stay, to ask, to refuse, to be seen, to take up space, until one day you look back and realize the distance between who you were and who you are becoming is extraordinary. That distance is yours. You built it. One I wasn't finished at a time. One boundary that held. One moment you chose your own dignity over someone else's comfort. That is not small. That is everything. You came here today carrying something. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know you know. And I want you to leave with this. The fact that you are still here, still seeking, still asking questions about who you are and what you deserve, that is not desperation, that is courage. That is the beginning of everything. Trauma trained you, but you are the trainer now.